welcome everyone to tonight's meeting of the Kentucky Coalition for Advancing Education. My name is Tony Cons-Tatman. I'm the Chief Communications Officer here at the Kentucky Department of Education. And we'd like you to thank everyone for gathering with us here online and those of us who are joining us on the KDE Media portal. So we are so excited to bring everyone together again after a little bit of a break this summer. And I would like to kick things off with our partners with CIE, with Donnie and Gretchen and Paul. Take it away, guys.
And our colleagues Sarah and Lauren are also here with us. And we are so excited to see everyone after the hiatus that Tony mentioned. And I'm just going to quickly talk through the agenda for tonight, although we sent a quick email about it earlier in the week as well. So the first thing we'll do is just do a quick welcome and a connection activity. Can you go ahead and move to the next slide, Gretchen? Awesome. And then we'll spend a little bit of time reviewing these incredible products that the Coalition has been building since June. And we'll do some small work, some work in small groups, excuse me, in the teams that were originally drafting them. And then we'll come back all together to talk through any large changes or suggestions that we want to make to the current state, future state, and co-creation guide. Following that will be the process of ratifying those and moving forward with the publication of those reports. The learning agenda is something that will evolve more over time, and that evolution is taking its next step tonight. And so the group, that will be a time for all of us to review that incredible piece of work and think about how we can continue to add to it in order to help support the work of the L3 communities. And then we'll close with some words from Dr. Glass. With that, just for a quick review of the agenda, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Sarah, to help us with the connection activity.
Great, thank you. Can we advance to the next slide? So welcome everyone, good evening. So just as a forward to this, I am a huge nerd about the idea of collaboration. Like I literally spent 2 years of my life studying collaboration, all the research behind it, and how we can support students to become better collaborators. And when our team internally was meeting on Tuesday morning, looking at the documents that our large group here is going to look at tonight and discuss, there was like a giddiness that comes from, a great group project. So it made me think for our welcome and connection, like, let's talk about that, a great group project. So in the chat, I want you to spend a few minutes thinking about what is a great group project from your personal, professional, or civic life that was successful, and tell us what was that collaboration and what made it successful. So the example I would share is I'm part of an annual women's weekend that brings about 30 women together in one big house. And it's great because we all take on different roles that allow us to share our different gifts. So some women lead meals, some plan activities, and some decorate, and some just come and make sure that everyone feels welcome. So think about what's a great collaboration and what made it successful from your life, and share that in the chat. Wow. So Mark says establishing a school theater group that has won state and national awards. So an external validation. So like establishing something and then having it come and be recognized. So a yearly retreat to plan and renew goals. So what makes all those things successful? What are the components of that collaborative success? Shaka says, I worked at a school as a teacher and coach. And I think about our third season of existence, an undefeated regular season. It was great to see coaches, teachers, and parents rally around the team to ensure sustainability early and to share in the successes as they came. I love that. Writing a grant and receiving it, working together, dividing the work based on strengths, monitoring and accountability to meet deadlines. Missy says, having input from others and hearing agreement and feeling the fresh energy. Penny shares about a family engagement workshop where someone who gets me, compliments how I process. These are so wonderful. I love this question because it lets us peek into like our own individual lives as we show up here. But as we read these answers, sharing tasks, being accountable to one another, being seen for our own gifts, and collectively sharing in the joy of success. All of that is something that I hope you'll carry into this evening as we talk through this great group project and continue to carry that forward as the local laboratories of learning work and collaborate to activate this next phase of work. And as this coalition looks and carries the work forward across the state in the next months. So with that, I will pass it on.
Thank you so much for that, Sarah. That was really amazing to ground in both an excellent story from our past and to bring those memories and those insights into this evolving great story, this story of us. And in order to further our continuing collaboration, I just want to lift these community agreements back up, starting and ending on time, using the video on if you can, listening to understand, acknowledging the many forms of expertise that are in our group, showing up as your full self, not just your job title, asking the next hard question, staying present and dreaming boldly, as we were directed in our very first meeting with by Dr. Glass to dream boldly. And tonight's the next step of that dream. And so I'm going to help us get into that group work time. So we're going to break up into 4 different groups. And Gretchen, can you move to the next slide? One really important note is that you probably saw if you opened up our email and opened up the report is that one of the big things that's happened is that we actually decided to pull together the current and future state reports. They made more sense together as a single unit than they did as 2 distinct reports. But we are still going to break up into 2 groups in order to discuss them because they sit side by side, but we're still going to make our suggestions in the working groups that develop them. And so for the current and future state and the co-creation guidebook, we're going to be asking some pretty big questions about whether or not the documents that are written reflect the strength of the system, the needs of those who are not yet well served, and if the future state captures the opportunity and the aspirations as boldly as we would want to. And in the co-creation guidebook, we have gone through some work together and we've used tools and approaches, and you are bringing some in as well from other parts of your life. Like, are there things that we need to capture in that document in order to make it as useful for the local laboratories of learning that as it could be? And so those 2, we're trying to get those to a pretty final place. And we're going to capture those suggestions on some work slides that follow this one. And so I'm going to put our meeting PowerPoint into the chat in just a moment. But with the learning agenda, this is still in a place of co-creation. So this is a place where you and your group, in that group, will be talking about whether or not these are the questions that are really at the heart of the work. And if these questions feel right towards our vision of a shared future. Does it make sense? Will this really help our local teams get started? We had a great launch last week, and they're starting to work on their coalitions. And these documents are making sure that they don't start from zero, that they are starting with the insights that we have taken all the time to gather and collect. And so this is our moment to really help drive that forward. If you can go to the next slide, Gretchen, would be great. Now, when we come back all together, Paul is going to lead us through a review of the edits that we make. And that process is going to utilize what we have developed as a habit here of doing the fist to five. And the goal here is not to do really like minute copy editing. We're going to ask for your authorization to do that later. This is about getting to a level of commitment to the documents that we feel like we can endorse them in our communities, that we can go out and share these and be extremely proud of them, and to help advance them in people's understanding of them in the world, in the field. And so I wanted to just share a quick thought about the threshold of the edits that we're asking for tonight. Now, where these questions are here for you to use as guides for whether or not you want to suggest it to your group. Does the edit change how somebody would use the document? Does it change or edit the meaning, like the deep meaning of what's being written there? Does it change who a particular theme or an idea focuses on? Does it really shift the focus from one group to another, for example? And does the edit make the content similar or simpler and more accessible? Or does it make the content more reflective of the spirit of something that a user shared? Remember, we rooted these in the user profiles that we created together. So these are big edits. And so if something meets this threshold, we want you to bring it up and use this as a guide for whether or not it's something you want to share with your team. If it's a smaller edit, I think we ask you to hold on those for now. Put them in your back pocket, and there'll be another opportunity. But we're going to do more copy editing, kind of wordsmithing later. We're asking for right now to try to get to the kind of big thematic, big concept changes, making sure that we've made those changes and we feel good that these documents reflect the big, deep, and powerful spirit that this coalition has embodied since the beginning. I know that's going to be something that's going to evolve in each group. So what we're hoping for, if as a simple rule of thumb, aiming for like somewhere between 3 and 5 substantive edits. And if you don't get to 3, that's fine. If you don't make any, if you feel like totally good about the product, that's good. That's fine too. But hoping to not have more than like 5 big substantive changes that surface out of this process, because we're going to review them all together and vote on them all together. Okay, we don't have too many of those, I suppose. Okay. I'm going to put this into the chat for everybody to utilize. And moving forward now, Lauren, how are we doing on the assignments?
We're good to go.
Okay. So, and here are the copy or the links to all of the various reports. Okay, so the current future state report, co-creation, guidebook, and learning agenda are now in the chat as well. And Sarah, thank you for putting the deck into the chat too. Okay. Rock and roll. Don't forget to record. And so we are going to take a moment now to review some of those big changes and put them forward for everyone to consider. And so I'll hand it over to Paul to share a bit, or to lead us through that.
Thank you, Donnie. As Donnie said, this is kind of the big moment. We're going to take a look at the notes. And if you have the slides open, you can scroll down through from slides 7 to 10 and take a look at them and what the comments are. And here's the process that we're going to do with the FISTA 5. And Donnie's already described what FISTA 5 is, so I'm going to presume everyone knows how to do that. If there are any comments for changes, I'm going to ask the CIAE person who was in that group to read out the statement. And I'm going to ask if we were to address this, then can we move forward with addressing this item? We may need to have some clarification on it, but we will go through each item and look at them one by one and vote on them before we move to a vote on the full document. So right now we're looking at the integrated document of the current and future state. We're going to look first at the current state writing team's comments and notes and suggestions, and look at them individually and then vote. So with the CIE person in the group, speak to the items that recommendation. Let's go for the first recommendation.
Yeah, so actually, we ended up not making any recommendations, but we did make a note, which is that we didn't think that this needed to be revised today, but you sort of can't help but notice that the school leader themes are a little thinner than others when you look through the full now integrated current and future state. And we know that, for sure, like the learning agenda is going to continue to evolve, but also these documents are going to continue to be a place where we can capture new learning. So these are documents that capture what we discovered and we're sending on to the L3s, but we would maybe like to make a request that we have some intention to really look for and listen for the voices and needs of school leaders and make sure some of those things are captured back in this document as the L3s work. So no need for action on the documents today, but that recommendation.
Okay, so with that, and so those are both sets of recommendations, Gretchen?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So with that recommendation that we make an effort to bring more school leader comments into the document, I'm going to ask in a second if you will vote FISTA 5 on that recommendation, but let's look at the future state recommendation as well. And
Great.
Donnie, were you the person there?
Sure was. And just want to give a huge shout out to that team. It was awesome discussion and so helpful in sharpening and refining this to a place where we feel really good about it. First, I was remiss in noting something that it's probably worth just a shade more detail about how these are going to be used, just as to refresh people's memories. The current state and future state are going to help the L3 communities create their own local visions for that they want to guide their design work. And so the themes that we've come up with are going to help anchor their coalitions as they move forward. And so they'll read all of these things, and then they may ask themselves how they want to change them or adapt them in order to make them fit their local context. And as they identify a theme that matters, that seems to resonate a lot with them, they would then look at the learning agenda and use that as a tool to unpack how they're going to go from the current state to the future state. Like, what questions do they need to answer? What do they need to put at the center of their inquiry? And so I just wanted to put that lens on it, just so that people were grounded in why some of these changes might be quite important to that local work. And the co-creation guide is the toolkit by which they do that inquiry. And so I just wanted, I didn't say that earlier clearly enough, and so I wanted to just recenter us on that. So in service of that, the future state team noted that in the very first theme, it used to say, sorry, I'm scrolling up. go from random acts of improvement to common visions, deep partnership, and shared responsibility. And the suggestion there was that we change it to go from perceptions of random acts of improvement to common visions, deep partnership, and shared responsibility, recognizing that there are multiple points of view about whether or not it's random, but that if it's perceived that way, that might get in the way of people's commitment to it and a sense of shared vision and deep partnership and responsibility. So that's the first. And then the second, in theme 7, it was reading before, it centered this idea of failure. So create conditions where everyone can fail and improve by learning from one another instead of competing. And we changed that, like the word failure felt maybe too centered and loaded, in that what we were really trying to get at was that we're trying to create conditions where everyone feels safe to take intellectual risks, make mistakes, and improve by learning from one another instead of competing. And so I think we held on to many of the deep themes of that sentiment, but really centered it around this idea of risk-taking and improvement.
Thank you, Donnie. So since these 2 recommendations are actual changes in the document, I'm going to ask that we vote 5 to 5 on each change. And so for the first one then, keep moving around. I want to read it here. Where are we?
It's highlighted in blue. So
Yeah.
go from perceptions of random acts of improvement to common visions, deep partnership, and shared responsibility. And I think the edit is perceptions of random acts.
So if we could just go to the full screen of everybody, stop sharing right now. If you agree that we should move forward with that change, vote 5 or fist to 5. If you don't want to see that change, go with a fist. If you're okay with it, somewhere between a 2 and a 4. So I'm seeing
any fists.
Not seeing any fists. So I think we're good to go there. And then the second one.
Hang on. Sorry, I'm hung up here.
The second one is create conditions where everyone feels safe to take intellectual risks, make mistakes, and improve by learning from one another instead of competing. That would be the new language for the current state. 5 to 5. I'm not seeing any. A couple people are still thinking.
Also seeing 5 in the chat.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
All right. I think we're good to go there as well from what I have seen. Please point out if there's anybody who really put a fist up, but I'm not seeing any in a quick review. Okay, so those were the 2 changes to the integrated current and future state. So if we were to move forward with those 2 changes and over time really build up the school leader section as was recommended by the current state group, are you comfortable moving forward with the integrated current and future state report? 5 to 5.
I learned earlier today there's actually number emojis that you are in the reactions, and somebody used those earlier today in a different meeting. So
That's because we all have hands. I don't know if we needed that.
Okay.
I see a question from Robbie Fletcher.
No, that was my fist of 5. I'm giving a 5.
Oh,
I was getting lazy and still holding my hand up. I put my 5 up top. So.
You're doing it. You're using the hand emojis. All right.
Okay, so let's move on to the next report.
So that is the co-creation guide. I'll pull up the notes here.
All right, so I'll echo what Donnie mentioned earlier in the group. It's just really great to see the different stakeholders, even within the group who spoke about the co-creation guide, really bring their perspective to the group and allow the voices they represent to come through. So just a great experience and conversation that we had as well. Just a few notes overall, we suggested that we consider translating in the spirit of inclusive, radically inclusive design here, translating this document itself into those other languages, specifically a lot of Spanish speaking populations that are involved in these districts, just making that accessible. Also keep in mind to use non-educator, non-coalition member lenses when we take a look at this document as someone who uses this for implementation. We broke this down in our review into those 3 main sections of the document itself. In section 1, which is kind of the overview and background of this group in the project, we suggested that we add a high level kind of definition or scope of assessment and accountability from the current state. So some ideas that we threw around were an FAQ section, just a brief paragraph, some kind of call out box or hyperlink. One of our group members mentioned in conversation explaining this process, that was a really beneficial piece to have included for someone who's less knowledgeable about what assessment accountability are. In section 2, we suggested I hope I get this right, Susan, and interrupt me if I don't. There was a video, Gretchen, that you sent out ahead of tonight, and we referenced the slides and infographic that explained the design process itself, somehow including that information to provide a deeper look into the design process. And we decided that it might be helpful to have more explicit information on the team composition itself. Audrey suggested making sure that students are explicitly mentioned. We felt that was missing in the document. We reference stakeholders often, but it may not be that students are as prominently on the radar in that language as we would like them to be. And we also mentioned the ELLs and the other populations that we want to ensure are part of that recruitment process.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. So all of these recommendations are really for continuing edits and maybe a few new sections that make greater clarity as well as accessibility. So if I could characterize them overall. And so rather than vote on each of them individually, because you don't really actually have something to see, that would be a change. I'm going to ask you whether you are comfortable moving forward with the co-creation guide if these bullets that Sarah referenced are addressed in future editions of the co-creation guide. So with that, I ask you to stop sharing and ask you to do fist to 5 either in the chat or on the screen. Okay, very good. Again, I am not seeing any, scrolling through the various screens, I'm not seeing anyone coming up with below 4 or 5. Am I right about that? Okay. So I think we've ratified moving forward with the co-creation guide at this point. Now, next, we're going to move into the learning agenda. And-
This is Brian Gong.
Or Brian.
Just a question about the guidebook. There was a note at the end about additional resources coming soon. It's a very long list. Is the intention to get all of those before the guidebook goes out, or is this more of a there's a sort of basic process, and then additional resources will be added as they're available?
Donnie, do you want to speak to that? You're on mute, Donnie.
Yep. Sorry, Brian. Would you mind re-asking your question?
Yeah, on the version that I'm seeing of the guidebook, on page 17, 18 has additional resources coming soon, and it's a long list. And the question was, is the intention to have that in the guidebook before it gets sent out soon? Which I assume the answer is no, but I don't know. Or is this sort of like that there's a basic structure and then additional resources will be provided as as they're available?
Yeah,
because I think the basic structure is very sound, but it's
Yes, the intention is to also involve the L3 communities in creating the assets and resources. So it will evolve over time by design. And so many of those pieces are maybe a better way to say it is under co-construction. And so we'll be building a lot of that alongside the people who are doing the work in the field.
Thank you. Did that answer your question, Brian? You're good?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's move to the learning agenda. Sarah, do you want to address this?
Sure. So I'm just sharing the group feedback. I'm not walking through the documents at this point. Is that correct, team?
Yes. Actually, I think we do want to have you walk through the document first, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Because it's new to a lot of us.
Okay. I will start to share my screen. I have lots of screens right now, so I'm hopefully going to share the correct one. All right, so you all should be looking at the front page of the Google Doc that was shared in the email and shared before this meeting and shared in the chat earlier, which introduces just like what the heck a learning agenda is, how a learning agenda might work and be utilized by this coalition and this body of work, and then goes into identifying key question areas for each of the themes. So for folks that are less familiar with just what is the term of a learning agenda, it's a tool that has been utilized by groups like USAID and others in the nonprofit sector that includes a set of questions that address a critical knowledge gap and a set of associated activities to answer those questions and products aimed at disseminating the findings that can be applied to future work. So here we say these questions can be used, a learning agenda can be used to test and explore assumptions and hypotheses. They allow teams or organizations to stay open to the possibility that our assumptions or hypotheses might be revised and iterated upon, and they help us make more informed decisions in the future. And so here, as it applies to this group's work, we have really incredible statements that ground us in the current state, right? And then take us to a future envisioned state. How do we get there? What do we need to learn about collectively as a Commonwealth and within communities in order to move from here to there? And that's really the role of a learning agenda. It's meant to activate that envisioned future state into a set of really meaningful lines of inquiry that we might share and collectively learn about. We can see patterns across the state, and we can see what's unique for individual communities. So our learning agenda breakout team worked and brainstormed some ideas of what kinds of questions might inform each of the themes that were identified by the other groups. And you can see, for example, we have theme 1, the headline, the current state, and the future state, and then our learning agenda questions. And one of the things we noticed about our team sort of brainstorming efforts is there tended to be a pattern where some questions were focused on deepening our understanding of a phenomenon at stake, and then some questions really about how this phenomenon interacts with larger system conditions. And so you'll notice that that's sort of a repeating logic throughout each of the themes in this document. But then we were talking as a team, like, so what does that mean for where this work goes next for a local laboratory of learning? And so I'm going to click and transport you to a learning agenda workbook, which essentially aggregates all of those themes into a Google sheet. Because Lord knows I love a good spreadsheet that has lots of text on it and uses lots of tabs, but you'll see on my screen that each of the themes has an individual tab. And as we work through, you'll see very much what's there in the original Google Doc. The headline theme, learners in the Commonwealth will thrive if, the current state, the future state, and then those shared learning agenda questions and the categories of how we might deepen our understanding and analyze system conditions. To help local laboratories of learning really deepen and activate and use this, we also pulled some work from the reports where some of the individual stakeholder themes that helped create these current and future state statements, we brought those in to just give additional background, like try to consolidate some of that information in one place. But then the question's like, so what are these L3s going to do with that? And we're trying to use this workbook. Here, I'll go to theme 5. Try to use this workbook and say, like, so we have, for example, headline number 5, learners in the Commonwealth will thrive if we know people as more than statistics and involve them in inquiry about inequities, right? And we have our current state, our future state. And then we have our deepening questions, our deepening for understanding. So the big learn, how do we get from here to there? We'll ask the question of what does it look like to feel seen by a system for students, families, communities, and educators, because you see in that future state vision really aspirational language about stakeholders feeling seen. So that's an abstract idea. So a learning agenda inquiry could go deeper into like, so what does that mean? What does it look like? What does it feel like? And how might we know if that future state has been actualized? And then asking questions, how does our current approach to addressing inequity making students feel like statistics? Like we need to understand how is that phenomenon happening and operating? And how does that impact their relationship with schools? And then questions, how can we incentivize investments in learning about the felt experiences of students, families, communities, and educators? So L3 teams will look at these questions and be like, all right, so what the heck do we do now? Well, in the L3 process guide, the work that's going to launch this fall, they're going to be doing another round of empathy interviews and looking at local data and local evidence. So we're giving them a space in this workbook to say, what kinds of questions might you ask in a second round of interviews for your local work that would help you understand this phenomenon more? And who might you ask that question to? And how might you gather information to deepen your understanding of this theme at work? Then the next phase of how this learning agenda might be operationalized and used for the L3s is in a prototyping process where we haven't really addressed this much in this conversation in this coalition, but as L3s go through a process of deep empathy, understanding their context, how it relates to the current and future state in their own communities, and they start identifying like what might be our prototypes for a next vision for assessment and accountability. You can view those prototypes as a sort of hypothesis, as an answer to some of these learning agenda questions. For example, if Shelby County uses a portrait of a graduate that's assessed through a portfolio system that's activated through student-led defenses of learning at key milestones, then students will feel more seen by this system, right? So you could ask this question. So like, we want to test, like, that's the hypothesis. We believe that students will feel more seen by this approach to assessment. So then when we're evaluating the quality of that prototype, we would ask ourselves, what kinds of evidence might we need to collect in order to test that hypothesis that this is an answer to this question? Does that make sense? So the purpose of this workbook is to sort of lay out for teams how they might translate this learning agenda into a localized local inquiry, lines of inquiry. And it's going to look different for different teams, but there also, because it's a shared learning agenda, there'll be opportunities for us to share and kind of notice patterns, notice differences, and that'll be helpful for future work moving forward. Does that sound good with team? Am I doing all right in sort of clarifying a slightly opaque task at hand?
Yeah, I think so. But in some ways, we're like the worst people to ask because we know a lot about it. But maybe stop sharing.
Okay.
We can see faces and see if there are questions about that before we go into these like suggested revisions from your group because you just met.
Okay.
So anyone have questions about what Sarah just shared? Or just other responses are fine too. They don't have to be questions. It's not Jeopardy. You can answer in whatever way you want.
And you can put it in the chat, or you could just raise it right here. Just speak up if there's something that's either a question or a comment.
I can see Brian Gong's brain working right now through the window of Zoom as he's reading. It's very fun. So as you all are writing your elegant feedback in the chat, I'll reiterate some things that have been said earlier tonight, that this is absolutely a work in progress. And that of all things, a learning agenda is always living and not fixed and static, because our learning will move the conversation forward. New insights will emerge and new questions will emerge as these local coalitions bring into focus. So one thing I didn't address, and that I could speak to as it relates to one of our items of feedback, if folks are ready for me to do that.
I think go ahead, but also everyone know if you have questions, continue to use the chat even though Sarah's speaking. And if you want to chime in, put your hand up on the screen so we can find you. So yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
Oh, Penny's got a question.
Of course she does.
Let's hear it.
So I'm sorry, I was reading it. Under analyzing system conditions, that's theme 9, I believe. In what ways does the accountability system contribute to the current state and or create barriers toward reaching the envisioned future state? Consider the 9 dimensions of accountability. What I like about that is it mentions barriers, right? So I guess, and this will be fleshed out in each individual, the counties will, I guess, address it in their own way. But I'm always concerned about validity, reliability, and sustainability. You know, can this be replicated? You know, whatever their forms of assessment are based on what they want to do. So how do we find out what kind of data are they going to produce? What hypothesis are they going to address to look at? Yes, they're going to see if it does create barriers, but does it do what it's intended to do? And can we replicate it?
That's great. Thank you. You almost read my mind, because I realized that I didn't address this repeating reference in across each of these themes to that question of, all right, so take this theme, what does it mean to be seen by a system, for example? Now run it through, like, how does our current dimensions of accountability, how does our current accountability design contribute to this phenomenon as it is in a current state? How might we really look at that? And this is going to be critical for the local laboratories of learning as they're building out their prototypes. Like, it's really great to do 20 more empathy interviews and understand what makes a family feel seen by a system. But there's also going to be a need for some deep analysis and sense making and conversations that will probably need to be supported about how you might consider these themes in light of these dimensions of accountability. So in the workbook, it's the last tab. And in the report, it's the last page. But thank you so much for bringing that up. And that was actually one of the pieces of feedback from our team, was making sure that it's clear what those dimensions are for a reader who's picking up these documents. And then as we move forward, we need to be thinking more deeply about how we might scaffold an analysis for teams to be doing and considering these dimensions according to each of the themes. All right, I'm going to stop sharing again.
So I'm just thinking about our protocol for decision making tonight. And I think, Penny, I want to check with you that I think what you're suggesting isn't like a revision to the document right now, but is a point of emphasis in terms of its use. Like, there's something there that you want to make sure people are attending to. Is that, am I, yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no changes for that. Yeah.
Great.
If I could just add, Gretchen, actually in a meeting yesterday with Brian Gong and Rhonda Sims and others, as we were talking about these kinds of issues that we're touching on now, Brian, in his wisdom, raised a couple points that we might want to add in at this point. And he said that if you have a system and you're looking at building new assessments and even measures of accountability, you might really want to look at whether they're desirable, are they feasible, and are they viable? And I think Penny was really particularly touching on viability. And I think those, we'll find a way to add that question in this second part, analyzing system conditions, because I think the Center for Assessment and Brian have really put their finger on kind of the three major questions that really drive system conditions.
Paul, just to expand on that, I think the dimensions of accountability are really powerful. You may want to think about adding at a future time something that corresponds to in what people have had currently are with standards, assessment, and accountability. And this addresses accountability standards. We don't want to just focus on academic standards, but standards are really that's desirable. What is it that people think is really desirable? And there should be some dimensions to help people think about that. And then I think there's the dimensions of accountability are I think appropriately not about assessment. They don't say how to measure things like that, but it might be useful to have some dimensions of and I'm not sure if assessment's right. It's like what evidence, right? What evidence counts in this? And part of the part about having voices and co-creating is that it's giving us a different way of saying what counts, and what is acceptable to the community. So I think just expanding this maybe is just a parallel way, having something about dimensions of what's desirable, and then something about evidence. I know a lot of the people are talking about changing the assessments, and just the dimensions of accountability I don't think will address it directly. If there's something that helps people address that directly, that'll be helpful. And I think structurally, I think it could be quite similar to what you've done here.
Right. And I just wanted folks to know that we are working with Rhonda and her team and Brian as we look at these documents, and we will look to continue to improve them based on their input.
So I just made a little note in the chat to try and capture briefly what you said more eloquently, Brian, but I think it's a suggestion of might we come to agree about some dimensions of evidence as we work? And that seems like something maybe to include in the learning agenda, since that's where we're gathering questions for inquiry.
I want to make sure that we represent Mark's feedback before we move on, in that he gave, and it echoes something that came up earlier, that there's a lot of really kind of educator language, like complex words and phrases here, and that there's a need to ground some of these vision statements in concrete examples that folks who are not educators or experts in accountability or system design, that they might hold on to and understand what's here. And one of the things we wonder is, could this learning agenda generate and elicit that sort of concrete grounding to these big lofty visions? And so I just want to make sure that we represent that here, and that the group might respond to that feedback, or, you know, echo it, give a high five to Mark for saying that, and then help support us thinking about, as the L3s move forward, how that might be represented and how they develop their lines of inquiry. High five to Mark.
I want to make a connection between looking at the guide and the learning agenda. Under the guide, there's it talks about the paradigm and what direction they want to go in as far as their groups, be it demography or targeted preference. That goes directly to that question about barriers and whether or not it does what it's supposed to do. So when they choose whether or not they're going to go with demography, meaning everyone will be represented, at least hopefully everyone they think will be represented, or a targeted preference, say you want just PTAs or you want counselors or that sort of thing. I know under that it talks about the difference between the two and the drawbacks for each. But when they look at those barriers, and we're looking at all of this evidence that we're talking about, which one they choose, I think, is going to correlate really, 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 is going to show us either it worked or it didn't.
This may be building on what Mark said. I think that, and what Penny's saying, the guidebook, I think, is really good at helping others do the process up to now, but the learning agenda is actually a new process, and people are going to need some supports to be able to get through that. If there were supports like what's in the guidebook that takes people all the way through developing themes and the focus, but that's going to help them go through their deciding on their questions and their solutions and their prototyping, that would be really helpful too. Maybe that gets developed as people are working on them. Then part of the documentation will come out of that.
Yeah, that integration, Brian, between the co-creation guide and the learning agenda is the intent, that there will be, in the way, there's some pages at the back of the co-creation guide that lay out a scope and sequence for how that inquiry might proceed, and the learning agenda workbook is sort of the tool that carries through and documents the learning and structures it and provides a really powerful support for it.
Donnie, I was going to add on to that what Brian was saying. As a leader of one of those laboratories of learning, what's the time frame in having that really fleshed out and developed in the guidebook as we began to kick off and launch in mid to late October? One of the things when I was just in my group talking to my community co-leader, who is not an educator, but is a wonderful advocate and well educated. I really had to start from scratch and give the whole context. And having that early on as we recruit other members and get their deep commitment in the work, because it's a huge commitment. And I don't want to rush you all or us together as a group, but the sooner we could have some of that work so we could provide context and the big picture, I think we'll be better at finding the committed members who are willing to do it if they know what the end result could be.
What they're signing on to. Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. So I think we should note, one of the things that was suggested for the guidebook was a high-level overview of assessment accountability in the current state. And I think there's your comment or question, Susan, is making me think that we need to arc out in clear sort of a narrative language, like this is where it's going to go. And I think Gretchen's video and visuals can support that too. We put those together in a way that gives you some pretty clear collateral that you can share with prospective coalition members. That should be something that we work on very quickly. And actually, Dina and I were having the same conversation earlier today. And so that's a good signal.
And Donnie, I would just add quickly to that, that would also include process, right? That we'll provide process recommendations so that you can show how you're going to get from the current state to a future state, what that might look like.
Yeah. Great. Awesome. So from a process perspective, Paul, what's the move here?
So I think we've got a number of recommendations here. I'm going to ask, actually, knowing that the learning agenda is definitely a work in progress, and that these two recommendations are that we have an agreement that we need to move forward and look to make some of the language more accessible, and we also need to be able to move more smoothly between the written report and the workbook. With that, as well as the other comments that have been made, if we build and improve the learning agenda, are we ready to move forward? Give a fist to 5 with the learning agenda as a work in progress. Are we moving forward where we are so far? Okay. I think we have agreement that we have everyone is either a 5 or close to it. I did not see a fist. Okay, so I think we're ready to move forward, and I think we've accomplished this first step of having good, clean first drafts of these documents. They will continue to be improved as you have recommended as a full coalition, and we really, really want to thank you for your work tonight. We know it may not have been that easy to be taking a look at these docs, but we want to thank you for your work so far, and stay with us as we look to improve them and complete them to get them out. Donnie?
I just want to take like a big inhale,
Totally.
exhale, like celebration. I was like really exciting. We wrote some really big documents together. I'm not saying that that's the end all be all of human existence, but it's a powerful thing to have written something that features so many perspectives and really synthesizes some very complex things into something that hopefully is super usable. I mean, that's the goal. And so I'm just excited and happy and feeling, sort of grounded in that. And so I just want to just send my appreciations for that, but really for, closing and wrapping around the charge that he originally sent us on this journey with. I want to turn it over to Dr. Glass and have him close us out.
Thanks, Donnie, and thanks, everyone. And I guess that's what I would start with, is just effusive appreciation and thanks for all of the work that you put in. I know that this has been a big lift. It was a lot of data and information to sift through. It's been a huge investment of your time over this summer and in the precious few weeks that we had without the threat of COVID, and now we're right back into it. You were spending those evenings in the summer working on this project and wrestling with some really difficult questions around what to include and exclude, and doing that in a big group is really challenging work. So just thank you to all of you for all the time and energy that you put into this, and the care and love that you have for kids and for our state that went into it as well. I also want to thank our friends from CIE who have been with us all through this. You really have been an exceptional group to work with and partner with, and that's going to continue forward. So we're lucky to have Gene Wilhoit here in the state with us, and his connections to all of this talent that we've been able to bring in across the country to support the work that we're doing here in Kentucky. So thanks to CIE as well. Special thanks to those of you who led with on this with your connections time. You took the lead in writing. You helped publicize this by putting out one of those op-eds, helping dig into those empathy interviews. You really went above and beyond. So thank you for that. Looking forward, we hope to feature the work from this group at the Statewide Education Summit on November 1st and 2nd. So it'll be a featured element of that. That'll be the grand rollout of this report. And so that's really exciting, and to have you be a featured element of that, I'm really proud to do that. So we invite all of you to that. Again, it's November 1st and 2nd. You can look on the department's social media feeds for pinned tweets or posts about that and how to register and get signed up. Attendance is free, and it's the full day on the 1st and then a half a day on the 2nd. And we have lots of COVID mitigation protocols in place to keep everybody safe, but we think it's going to be a great event and look forward to having you there. We're also working on some kind of panel or group made up of the members of this committee to explain the process and talk about it. And so we'll be tapping a few of you on the shoulder and asking you to participate in that. So look for that outreach. I want you to hear from me that I'm 1,000% committed to continuing this work. When Lou Young and the Board of Education brought me here, they got somebody that helped manage COVID for them for the past year. But that wasn't the reason that they wanted to bring me here. And it wasn't the reason that I wanted to come back to Kentucky. It was to get into this future visioning and imagining what education could be and what school could be for our future. And that's what I was excited about. That's the work that I was excited about doing. So every time that I talk about all of the things that we're battling with and arguing about over managing COVID and all the disruption, I always like to end on focusing, and we've got this other really exciting work that's imagining what the future could be, taking stock of different perspectives that we have in the state. But it's that looking ahead, looking out on the horizon beyond where we are now, and imagining that place that we're headed to. So I'm committed to that. We're committed to that at KDE, and we're committed to supporting the work of the local laboratories of learning that are also operating and thinking about how we take some of these concepts and put them into practice. Experiment, pilot, try something different when it comes to education and with testing and with accountability, and how could that be different? And how can we escape from some of the things that have been holding us back from really making a meaningful, engaging learning experience for kids, and something that prepares them for what I think is going to be a really exciting and fast-moving future. So I'll just conclude by saying thank you, and from my heart, deep gratitude, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you and working with you going forward. Donnie, I'll turn things back over to you, and thanks again.
Thank you, Commissioner Glass. I think that's a really incredible closing. And this is not the end. Don't let that scare you. Just remember that our job is to be alongside the L3 communities, listen to what they're doing, learn from what they're doing. So hold fast. We are switching the cadence to what we're doing. It's not going to be every week. We won't see you next week, but we will reach out to you as we launch those L3 communities and circle back with you to really reconnect about what's happening as we pursue that innovative vision that Dr. Glass just laid out. Thanks, everybody. Amazing work.
Amazing.
Yay.
Yay.